So this is the OSKA Series 5 and 6 pump, and the way to get to all the components inside the pump is by putting this on its front, and then you can access them through the back here. There are 6 screw holes which are PZ2 screws, and once you've undone those, gently pull the cover back off, and then you can access all of the components inside. So this is the mains lead here, which goes onto the on-off switch just here. Then you've got your main panel PCB, and the compressor is here. You have a timing motor the other end of the pump, and then you have the front panel PCB just here. For the air filter replacement, there's a plastic cap on the back of the pump, which is this white one here. You just unclip it on one side and you can access the air filter. Pull the air filter out, put a new one back in, and when you clip it back in, make sure it clicks in nice and snug. So for the mains lead replacement and checking the fuse, you pull this mains lead out from the pump and you just push these 2 plastic connectors together and give it a twist anti-clockwise and pull it out. This is where the fuse is, as you can see, and you want to see if that fuse has blown. If there is a blown fuse, put a replacement back inside the left connector, push the connectors together again, and then twist it clockwise, let go, and that is it, complete. For the green on and off switch replacement, it's sitting on the side of the pump here, and to access that you will need to push the 2 black tabs. There's one at the top here and one underneath. Using long nose pliers you can squeeze the 2 tabs together and then wiggle it out the side of the pump. Once you've pulled it out the side of the pump, you can easily access the cables. The top cables go to your main panel PCB and the bottom ones will go to your mains lead. Make sure you make note of where the positions of the cables are. The live terminals are always towards the front of the pump, and the neutrals are always towards the base of the pump. When taking the terminals off, sometimes they can cause a resistance, so you may need to do this a couple of times, a couple of goes at it, and once they are off, then you can access the on-off switch. So as I said, the top cables are for your main panel PCB, so keep those to one side, and then the bottom ones are for your mains lead. So again, keep those to one side so you don't get them confused. So you can move them down out of the way. Once you've got the green on off switch out, you can replace it by putting a new one in. Always make sure there's a little black tab on the side, goes on towards the base of the pump. There is a little plastic slot in the side of the pump, so you can't get the on off switch the wrong way around. Once putting it back in, make sure that you get it the right way round, and always start with the mains lead, as you can access that easier for a start, and the live cable always goes towards the front of the pump, and you just push those onto the terminal like so, and the neutral goes towards the base of the pump. Then coming onto the cable going onto the main panel PCB, you can just clip that on, making sure that the live terminals are in line and the neutral are in line, otherwise the pump will not work. Once you have clipped those in, making sure that the on-off switch is nice and snug in there, and if you have taken the mains lead out to give yourself some more room, just making sure that these cables are tucked out of the way so they don't get caught by the screw coming down here, and just put the mains lead into the holder in the bottom corner. You can put the back case on the pump, screw it back, and that's it done. So for the mains lead replacement, all you need to do is take the mains lead out of the side of the pump. It has a little holder down the corner here, and once you've pulled that out, you've got access to the cables. On the other end of the terminals is at the bottom of the green on-off switch on the side of the pump, just here. You have the main leads coming out to the main PCB, and underneath is where the mains lead joins into the bottom of the switch. To access those cables, to use some long nose pliers and squeeze the two black tabs together on the back of the switch, and once you've done that, you can easily access the cable terminals. The cable terminals sometimes can cause a little bit of resistance, so you may need a couple of times to pry them off by using a small bladed screwdriver. Once you've pried those off, you can get rid of the old mains lead and put the new one back on. For putting it back on, make sure that the live terminals and the neutral terminals are in line with each other, otherwise the pump won't work. So putting the live back underneath, you just literally put it back in and clip both back in, twist the main on-off switch back in. The on-off switch can only go in one way, as it's got a little plastic tab, and once that is done, push the cables in so that they don't get caught by any screws holding the back casing in, and put back into the mains lead holder retainer in the corner there, and you can put the back of the pump back on again. There is 4 mounting screws at either end. So there's 2 screws at either end of the plastic casing. Undo those with a Posi 2 screwdriver. And once you've unscrewed those, make sure you don't lose the screws. I always take them out, save losing them inside the pump, and then you also know that it's been undone completely. So removing the 4 screws, keep those to one side, and then once you've done that, you can lift the plastic casing out of the way. So on the pump, you have your ribbon between the 2 PCBs, so your main panel PCB, which is here, and your front PCB here. You have the cables coming from the switch into here, and the easiest way to take them off is there's a little bit of metal on inside the switch, and you can just squeeze it together and pull them off, and always making sure that the live is at the bottom of the PCB. Once you've done that, it gives you a little bit more room to move, and on this pump there is always a strip of glue, which has been as a hot melt glue that holds the ribbon in place. You will need to remove that to give yourself more room, as the ribbon will need to be put onto the new PCB. Use a small bladed screwdriver, being very careful on that you don't break anything on the pump. And once you've managed to lift one end of the glue off, you can normally pry it off gently and then use your hands to pull the rest off. Once that comes off, that can be thrown away in the bin, and the ribbon can be gently pulled off. Once that's off, you can now take the components off a lot easier. Now you can see what you're doing. So on the PCB, you have the timing motor goes to the top, and then the compressor cable is below that. You can see on the PCB, it will be written on there saying selector and compressor, which is the timing motor is the selector and the compressor is the next one down. You've got your air pipe monitor here, which this pipe always will need to go back onto, and then you've got the other part of the selector, which is your switch, which goes on here. On some of the compressors, they will have a red dot on the back, so that you don't get the two cables muddled up. So the compressor always has a red dot, whereas the selector timer motor doesn't. It has no paint dot on it. So it's a matter of just pulling them off, and then there is two screws at this end to unscrew, and when taking them off, make sure they are kept separate to the 4 screws that hold the rest of the mounting on that you've just taken off. And then it's a matter of just hold the cables out the way, just push the PCB up and pull it out, and there you've got the main PCB has been taken off. To put the PCB back in is a matter of just putting in an angle, as there is 3 holders in the corners that you need to get it tucked into. Sometimes it can be a bit of a fiddle to get in, and once it's in, then you put the 2 screws back on that you have put to one side. Screw that down, once that's screwed in, you can now start putting the cables back on. You can put the switch back in, which is this white one down here. That can only go to one type because there's only one of those on the PCB. Then you've got the 2 cables, as I was describing earlier, that the compressor has a red dot on the back of the terminals, and that will always go on the bottom one, and it's clearly marked up on the PCB under compressor. So that can just clip in there, making sure it's pushed down hard and it clicks into place. Then go and do the same for the selector or the timer motor, whatever you like to call it, and that can then be clipped onto there as well. Then the last thing you need to put on is the air switch monitor, which is this pipe here, making sure it is pushed on tight onto the switch, otherwise air will leak out of it. There is a little cable tie on it holding it in place, so just make sure that that is in nice and snug. So for replacing the compressor, you need to remove this main unit inside from the casing of the pump. By doing that, you have taken off the 2 cables onto the switch and the ribbon onto the front PCB. Move that out of your way, and you can access the main PCB on the back of the pump. There are 2 mounting screws on this end of the PCB, so unscrew those, and then that will mean that the PCB is then loose, so you can access the back of the compressor. There is 2 ports on this end of the PCB, which have your time motor and the compressor. It's the compressor cable you need, so give that a gentle twist and that will pull off like so. Once taking that off, move the PCB out of your way. You can then spin the compressor up so you can see what you're doing, and there is the air pipe coming off the compressor. This can cause you a bit of resistance, so the easiest way is to use a small bladed screwdriver just to pry it off a bit to release the pressure on it, and you can then pull the pipe off. As I said, it can cause a bit of resistance, so just be gentle when using the small bladed screwdriver and you can pull it off. There is always a cable tidy holding all the cables together. Use side cutters to just carefully cut the cable tidy without cutting any of the cables. Once you have done that, you can pull your cable back through, as we have already taken it off the PCB. Once this is done, that will mean that you can then access the back of the compressor, which is around here. These rubber mounts are pulled through the casing. So the easiest way to take them off is to pull them, and either using a knife or the side cutters, you can go in and chop them, and because you won't be using the compressor again. If you are only wanting to reuse the compressor for whatever reason, you can, by a little bit of persuasion, push these rubber mounts back through. So once you have cut the tabs off, you can then pull the compressor out and remove it and put a new compressor on. For putting the compressor back in, you've got these 4 rubber mounts. Make sure that they line up with the 4 holes on the back of the pump casing. And once you've put those, just make sure they all line up and they push it through all the holes. Then using long nose pliers, it's easiest if you can just push the compressor into the casing. Use a long nose pliers and grip at the end of the rubber mount and squeeze it and pull it back and turn it in a clockwise motion when pulling it through, so it pulls it through without ripping the new rubber mounts. Once it's through, go on to the next one and repeat the same steps by squeezing it and turning it in a clockwise motion and pulling it back at the same time, and the mount will pop through. And repeat for the 3rd and the 4th one with the same. And once they're in, you can then start putting all the other components back onto the pump. For a start, put the air pipe back onto the end of the compressor. You just need to, if you put it on the bottom part of the pipe first and push up, and you just give it a wiggle and it will go back on, making sure that you don't split the pipe. After that, you can put the main PCB back into its holder again, and you do that by putting it in an angle like so. Again, sometimes it can cause a bit of resistance, so just go careful and gentle when putting it back in. Once you've done that, then you've got the 2 mounting screws. Once you put the 2 mounting screws back in, then pull the cable through the little holder where you'll see the timing motor cable already, and just follow that through onto the main PCB, plugging it into the empty terminal that you took off earlier. So for replacing the timing motor on the pump, is the port on the main PCB is this top one here. By pulling that cable out, you can then access the rest of the timing motor afterwards. Spin the casing back over and you're able to then start taking the timing motor down here off. There is 2 securing screws down on the timing motor, one this side and one over this side. This one's always the easier screw to undo first. So once you've unscrewed that, you can make sure you take the screw out so you don't lose it, put it in a safe location. And then for the other mounting screw, the easiest way is to spin the timing motor right round, and then you can access the other screw. Once you've unscrewed that one, the timing motor can then come out of the holder and gives you a bit more flexibility on replacing the other pipes. So next, you then take the outlet hose connector off the timing motor, and that is done by just giving it a bit of persuasion. If it causes some resistance, use a small bladed screwdriver just to take the air seal off the end of the pipes, being careful not to split any of the piping. Once you've done that, just give it a little bit of a wiggle and it'll pop off, making sure it's the correct way up, putting it out of the way nice and tidy, and then you've got the air input pipe from the compressor onto the timing motor. Again, you may need to just give it a bit of persuasion so it comes off. Once that's off, you've then got your 2 wires coming on the switch. They have a little metal tab inside the individual connector. Just give that a squeeze and you can pull that off each terminal, and the same again on the other one. There's no right and wrong way round on those cables, and once that's done you can then pull the cable from the PCB that you've already unplugged, tracing it through the other cables. Again, just going careful that you don't pull any other cables off the PCB. Once you've done that, you can just pull that out, and that is your timing motor out, and you can put your new one back in. For putting the new one back in, always start with the cables onto the switch. Is the easiest way, and you just clip them on by just pushing them onto the terminals like so. Once they're clipped in, then start putting the main inlet pipe into the timing motor, making sure it goes into the middle port, and then you can get the hose pipe connector onto the timing motor, which goes either side of the inlet pipe, making sure they're pushed back nice and tight. Once that is complete, you can then put the timing motor back into its holder. As described earlier, you need to turn the timing motor round to get to one of the screws. Put the screw back in so it's nice and tight, and I would fix that down while holding the timing motor out of the way. Once that's screwed down, turn the timing motor back round to its correct position and putting the other screw back in. You can then flip the holder back over and putting the ribbon back on. Make sure that the ribbon is always facing towards the front of the pump. You may need to move these cables out of the way and hold them out of the way when doing it, and be very gentle when you put it back together again, otherwise you can bend the pins on the main panel PCB. By pushing it back in, make sure that there's no pins exposed. As you can see, that is in, there's no pins exposed on either end, and then that can go back round and have your cables coming off the switch to go on. The live cable always goes to the bottom, and it's a matter of just pushing it on and it clicks into place. Then the neutral above. Once that's in, you can just put that back into the pump. Make sure on the other end where the air comes out into the hose, that is clipped in nice and tight. Then you have the 4 screws, mounting screws to put back in. So there's 2 at the front and 2 at the back. Just make sure that your mains lead is put back into its holder and that there's no cables going to be caught by any of the screws holding the casing down. And once you've done that, you can put the casing back on the top.